If you wash me and make me clean, I'll bear you strong children, human, begged the dirty alien girl.
The wind sweeping through Cero's prime was sharp with the stink of rusted metal, burnt insulation, and human waste. This part of the city, once a trade capital for the outer colonies, had been abandoned after the orbital grid failed and the power stations went cold. Now, it was just slag and silence, punctuated by distant scavenger skirmishes and the occasional muffled explosion when someone triggered an old mine or collapsed a tunnel overhead. Arthur Rourke moved quickly but carefully, keeping his steps quiet on the fractured pavement. He ducked under a half-toppled walkway, eyes scanning for movement in the fog drifting through the ruins. He wasn't here to fight, wasn't here to help anyone. He just needed parts. His objective was the gutted remains of Sector 4, Trade Corridor East, where old bonding boutiques and ceremonial export houses once lined the streets. Rumors said a forgotten Deccan core still ticked under one of the abandoned shops. If he could find it, he could barter it for 6 weeks of food gels or enough power cells to keep his bunker running through the next radiation storm. Arthur was a survivalist, not a hero. He'd learned to mind his own business. On Ceros, interfering got you shot, stabbed, or tagged by a roaming slaver band. He rounded the corner of a collapsed storefront, stepping over the charred skeleton of an old merchant bot, and froze. Behind a metal ration crate, crouched low against the side of a flickering neon post, was a girl. She was alien, Valari. He could tell immediately from the elongated limbs and smooth, violet skin peeking through the dirt. Her body was wrapped in what looked like the remains of a ceremonial silk garment, now shredded and soaked in mud. Her white-silver hair was knotted and stuck to her neck in greasy ropes. Her eyes, barely visible through the grime, were wide, glowing faintly, and locked on him. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stared at him and said, in a hoarse but calm voice, "If you wash me, if you make me clean again, I'll bear you strong children. I swear it, human." Arthur blinked. It wasn't the words that caught him. He'd heard worse in these ruins. Desperate people offering themselves for a strip of rations or a working heater coil. No, what stopped him was her tone. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't hysterical. She was composed, like she was making a deal. Like this wasn't her first time offering herself up just to survive another night. He didn't respond. Instead, he scanned the alley. No collars. No tracker tags on her skin. No marks from ownership cuffs or slaver burns. But she had ink, Valari tattoos, mostly hidden under the grime, coiling around her hips and upper thighs. Noble markings. That meant she wasn't born in a cage. She'd been cast out. She was maybe 25, maybe younger. Her ribs showed, and her left leg was scraped raw from something rough, possibly from crawling. "Where's your group?" Arthur asked finally. Her throat flexed once. Dead or sold. His grip on the strap of his satchel tightened slightly. He wasn't here to save anyone. He told himself that again. He didn't have the resources. He didn't know who she was or what kind of attention she might attract. But something about her posture, tall, still, waiting, didn't fit the usual street filth. "I have a shelter," he said slowly. "It's not comfortable. Not safe, really, but better than here. I'll come. You can't walk far like that." "I'll walk." Arthur took off his outer jacket and tossed it toward her feet. "Put that on." She reached for it, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled it over her shoulders. The jacket swallowed her frame. She tightened it with the strap from the inside lining. No wasted movement. They didn't talk as they moved. Arthur kept an eye on the skyline, scanning for heat signatures, drones, or patrol lights. Once, he saw a glimmer of motion behind a collapsed monorail, but kept walking. No one followed. Yet, the way to his bunker was narrow, through a collapsed elevator shaft, across a derailed tram tunnel, then down a sealed metro access pipe. Lasari didn't complain once, but by the time they reached the last leg, she was breathing raggedly and limping. When the sealed door to his shelter hissed open, she nearly collapsed forward. Arthur caught her under the arms and lowered her to the concrete floor just inside. His bunker was deep inside the old maintenance systems under Terminal 3. It was small, reinforced metal walls, patched with scavenged scrap, and old industrial insulation. A sleeping mat in one corner, a salvaged water tank, a fusion coil heater rigged to a regulator, and a half-functional decontamination shower built from an old terraformer stall. He placed her on the mat, then opened a storage drawer and pulled out a sealed Deccan foam canister. "This is industrial grade. It'll strip anything. Use it in the stall. Don't touch your eyes." She tried to stand but stumbled. Arthur caught her again. She didn't fight him. "I'll help," he said. "Then you do the rinse yourself." She nodded once. He guided her into the stall. It was barely big enough for two people. The privacy screen hung off one side. No time for shame out here. He activated the foam. As the foam sprayed across her shoulders, she tensed, back arching instinctively. He worked quickly, spreading it across her skin with gloved hands. The grime began to melt off her body in slick, grayish streaks. Her real skin, violet, smooth, scarred in places, emerged beneath. There were old burns along her right rib cage, small nicks along the back of her thighs. Her spine showed malnutrition. Her ankles were swollen. But she stood tall, steady, even as the water began to rinse it all away. She pulled the rinse lever herself. Warm water ran down over her body. Her eyes closed. Arthur stepped back, let her have the space. When she finally emerged, she was wrapped in a clean thermal blanket, her hair loose and wet down her back. She looked like a different person, still tired, still thin, but clear-eyed now. Her gaze was sharp, even in exhaustion. He handed her one of his old shirts. She took it, no hesitation. She tied it around her waist to keep it from slipping. They sat opposite each other at the heater. He opened a ration pack and split it. She ate slowly, cautiously. Then she looked up and said, voice flat, "I meant what I said." Arthur didn't answer right away. He watched her across the heater coil, saw the way her fingers trembled slightly as she held the food pouch. She wasn't trying to seduce him. She wasn't playing any angle. She was just surviving, offering what she thought was still of value. But there was something else too. Pride. Despite it all, she didn't beg. She didn't plead. She had made a deal, and she expected it to be honored. Arthur leaned back against the wall. "I'm not that kind of man," he said finally. She nodded once, not as a dismissal, but as acknowledgement. "Then why bring me?" "I don't know," he admitted. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind howled through the old ducts. Inside, the bunker remained quiet. Two strangers breathing in the same space, both pretending not to feel the shift in the air. The heat coil hummed steadily inside the bunker. The air was dry, slightly metallic from the recycled filtration system, but warm enough to ward off the creeping cold that always settled into the sublevels after dark. Arthur sat cross-legged by the heater, arms resting on his knees, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the woman sitting across from him. Lasari had barely touched her ration. She sat quietly, wrapped in the thermal blanket, Arthur's oversized shirt tied neatly around her waist. Her long white-silver hair was still damp, combed back by her fingers into a rough braid. Her skin was cleaner now, the soft bioluminescent flecks across her collarbones and neck faintly pulsing in the dark. A trait of her kind, one rarely seen outside ceremonial halls or genetic clinics. Arthur didn't speak for a long while. He wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't panicked. She didn't ask where he was from or what he planned to do. She simply waited, calm, composed, like someone who had long ago stopped expecting comfort and learned to live on the edge of survival. Eventually, Arthur broke the silence. "You meant it. About the children." Lasari didn't flinch. "Yes." He studied her. "Why that offer? Why say that?" She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Because people here don't save you unless you're useful. And sometimes they only see one kind of usefulness." Arthur didn't deny it. Ceros Prime wasn't a place for compassion anymore. The war had left the city broken, not just the buildings or power grid, but the people too. The Volari were once considered valuable allies in biocultural trades. Now, after the collapse of their clusters and the shutdown of off-world breeding programs, many of them have been deemed excess cargo. Some were sold, others simply thrown out into the streets. "You from the East Sector?" he asked. "No, Upper Tower District." Before it fell, she shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter. My bonding was scheduled. Genetic pair. Selected 3 cycles in advance. Arthur frowned. So you were part of the core registry. I was. She didn't elaborate. What happened? Lasari looked at him directly. I said no. He waited. They assigned me a mate. I refused. Refusal is disobedience. Disobedience is discarded. She blinked slowly. I fled before they could repurpose me. Arthur leaned back, trying to make sense of it. Her tattoos. He'd noticed the spirals along her hips, the faded symbols of a Valari noble line, weren't something a street slave would have. This woman had once belonged to a genetic echelon, bred and raised for controlled lineage preservation. But instead of living in a sterile chamber with medical monitors and nutrient baths, she was here, barefoot, skin scraped, sitting in a scavenger's bunker. He exhaled slowly. You've been surviving alone since then? Yes. I knew the old tunnels. I stayed out of sight. Sometimes I traded what I had. Sometimes I ran. Her tone didn't waver. There was no bitterness, only facts. Then the market burned down. I lost what little I carried. Arthur didn't press further. He knew enough. In Saros, no one crawled out of the ruins unless they had already seen the worst. He stood and moved to the back wall where a rusted locker held spare blankets, a water pouch, and a few personal items. He handed her the pouch. It's clean. Take it slow. She drank cautiously. Her throat flexed with each swallow. Arthur watched her hands, delicate but steady. I'm not going to make you earn your stay, he said. Not like that. Lasari didn't react the way he expected. She didn't thank him. She didn't soften. She just nodded once. That's rare, she said simply. Most would have taken the offer. Or resold me. Arthur sat back down across from her. I've seen too many deals like that end badly. Doesn't mean I'm some saint. I just don't want the kind of trouble you bring. Then why bring me at all? She asked. He hesitated. Because no one else would have. That landed. For a moment, her expression cracked. Just slightly. Her eyes darted to the side. Her breathing hitched once before steadying again. But she didn't cry. She didn't let her voice shake. They sat in silence a while longer, both of them adjusting to each other's presence. The heater clicked softly in the background. The bunker felt smaller than it had a few hours ago. Arthur reached for his gear bag and began checking the contents. Salvaged wiring, a portable heat sink, half a transmitter unit he planned to barter the next day. You planning to stay here long? He asked without looking up. Lasari was quiet for a moment. If I leave, I'll be hunted. He paused. By who? Slavers. Militia. Anyone who thinks I'm worth something. Arthur rubbed a hand down his face. That was what he was afraid of. If word spread that a free Valari, especially one with reproductive coding and royal lineage markers, was hiding out in a Scav bunker, the price on her head would climb fast. He finally looked at her again. You're not branded. No ownership code. That means no one's claimed you yet. Lasari nodded. But they will, if they find me. Arthur didn't like the direction this was going. He wasn't a fighter. He didn't want to be dragged into someone else's war. But now, just by taking her in, he was already on the edge of being hunted. He sighed. Tomorrow will reinforce the outer seals. I'll reroute the beacon array. If anyone's tracking heat or movement signatures, I want them hitting false trails. Lasari watched him. You're going to help me. He didn't answer. You already are, she added. Arthur stood and walked toward the wall console to adjust the power drain from the external grid, masking the bunker's energy use. But her voice followed him. I don't need you to want me, but if you let me stay, I will find a way to be useful. He turned his head halfway. Useful doesn't mean offering yourself. I know, she said. They didn't speak again that night. Arthur lay down on his mat and rolled to his side. Lasari remained by the heater for a while, sitting cross-legged with the blanket draped over her shoulders. Eventually, she curled up near the wall, her back against the steel, her breathing slow and steady. Arthur didn't sleep for hours. He kept watching the shadows, wondering what he had just invited into his life, and wondering if, for once, the risk had been worth it. The next morning came slowly, without sunlight. In the ruins of Saros Prime, time was measured not by the sky, but by the distant tremors of scavenger drills or the echo of gunfire somewhere deeper in the city. Arthur Rourke stirred before the filtration system cycled on. He sat up, rubbing the back of his neck, surfing the mat. The faint glow of the control console pulsed gently near the far wall, indicating stable oxygen flow and a temperature reading barely above freezing. Lasari was still curled up near the heater. At some point during the night, she had pulled a second blanket over herself and tucked her legs tightly beneath her. Her long silver hair lay across her shoulder in a tangled cascade. She hadn't moved much. Her breathing was slow and even. Arthur stood, careful not to wake her, and crossed the bunker to the utility panel. He'd slept with one ear open all night, waiting for signs of movement outside. Footsteps, scanners, drones. Nothing had come, but that didn't mean they were safe. He keyed into the external scanner logs. There, 3 separate sweeps between midnight and 4 a.m. Thermal imaging drones, low frequency. Probably militia or freelance bounty spotters, looking for heat signatures underground. They were getting close. He glanced back toward Lasari. She had said she was hunted, but hadn't specified how recent that threat was. Now he knew. Someone had followed her into this zone, and by sheltering her, he'd just been marked too. As he moved to the storage locker to grab his toolkit, her voice came softly from behind him. You didn't sleep. Arthur didn't turn around. Didn't plan to. She sat up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The shirt she wore, his, was wrinkled but dry now, tied at the waist with a strip of cable fabric. Her legs were bare to the knees, bruised in places but healing. She looked less fragile this morning, though no less cautious. I heard the drones too, she said. You didn't mention you were that close to being tracked. I didn't know they were that close. Last time I saw them, they were still on the outer rim. Arthur crouched by the panel and began rerouting the signal scramblers. They're running heat maps. Passive scans at first, but they'll get aggressive once they think there's someone worth taking. They think I'm worth it. Arthur looked up. You are. That hung in air between them for a moment, too direct, too plain. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the comm terminal. That system's been dead for weeks, but I think I can tap into the old satellite net for a one-time burst. If I send a fake distress call from another location, they might shift search direction. Lasari stood slowly. Her movements were still stiff, but steadier now. She stepped barefoot across the cold floor and knelt beside him. I can help. Arthur hesitated. With what? She reached over to the relay housing. These models use bonded codes. I know the bypass frequencies. They're Valari made. My bloodline designed some of the original bonding protocols. Arthur blinked, then gave her space to access the panel. She worked quickly, fingers gliding over the worn interface, occasionally pausing to adjust a frequency offset. The old unit flickered to life, briefly displaying a Valari diagnostic emblem before sputtering in a manual control mode. He watched her work, silent. This was the first time she'd taken initiative. Not as a guest, not as a survivor, as someone with skills, with knowledge, with purpose. Most people think we're just breeders, she said, not looking at him. Genetic vessels, ceremonial partners. But Valari women were trained in control systems too, especially those of noble line. Arthur asked carefully, So, you were raised for a diplomatic bond? Yes. My mate would have been a liaison to the human consort divisions. Our pairing was meant to reinforce the interspecies accord. And you refused it? They picked him. I didn't. Arthur nodded slowly. That piece of the puzzle had been missing until now. The girl behind the crate hadn't just been a street reject. She had walked away from an elite role that made her not just a fugitive, but a political liability. No wonder people were hunting her. The comm panel bust. She leaned back. Distress signals set to emit from dockline Sector 3 in 12 minutes. Should scramble their local patrol. Arthur exhaled. Not bad. She looked up at him. I told you I could be useful. There was no smugness in her voice. Just quiet, earned certainty. He stood. We'll need to reinforce the upper duct seals. If the scan grid doesn't throw them off, we'll have visitors by nightfall. I'll help with that too. Arthur glanced at her bare feet. You're still recovering. I can stand. I can hold tools. You've already done more than enough for me. She tilted her head slightly. Let me do something. He didn't argue. Together, they began sealing the overhead ductwork. She stood on the console table while he passed up panels of scavenged metal and old mesh. He noticed that she worked in silence, focused, only speaking when necessary. No wasted energy. No complaints. By midday, the bunker was running quieter than ever. Heat bleed reduced, power drain minimized, and 2 more false heat signatures planted in the surrounding ruins using scrap boilerplates. They sat again near the heater, this time without the tension of strangers. Arthur opened another food pouch, handed her half. Lasari took it. If you want me gone after this, I'll go. He shook his head. That offer's off the table. I didn't just bring you here to rinse you off. Then why did you? He looked at her for a long moment. I think I saw someone who wasn't done fighting yet. Her expression didn't change right away. Then slowly, she lowered her eyes to the food pouch and nodded once. Not a reply. Not yet, but something close. Later that evening, as they finished reinforcing the hatch locks, Arthur heard something unusual, an old motion sensor chirp from the far side of the bunker's perimeter. He froze. Lasari paused beside him. He moved to the control screen and cycled the feed. 3 figures. Human. Light armor. Carrying pulse rifles. One of them held a tracking scanner. They hadn't found the entrance yet, but they were close. Arthur stepped back, voice low. They're here. Lasari's pulse visibly quickened. Warlord scouts. Could be. Or bounty freelancers. Doesn't matter. If they get eyes on this dome, we're done. He moved fast, checking the hidden escape route in the floor vent. It was tight, dark, and lined with old sewage cables, but it led to the outer tunnels. Not comfortable, but survivable. You fit? He asked. I'll make it fit. He nodded once, heart pounding. Then we go now. Quiet. Fast. She didn't flinch. She grabbed the satchel, packed the tools without being told, slung it over one shoulder, and dropped into the vent after him. As they crawled into the tight shaft, the warning sensor pinged again, closer this time. Inside the narrow tunnel, their bodies were shoulder to shoulder. Every movement echoed through the metal casing. The stench of rot and mildew clung to the air. But neither of them spoke. They had chosen. Now they ran together. And for the first time, Arthur realized he wasn't running alone. The narrow shaft groaned under their weight. Arthur moved ahead, flashlight clipped to his shoulder strap, casting a thin beam forward across the rusted inner walls. Behind him, Lasari crawled silently, her breathing steady but fast. The vent was just wide enough to fit through sideways, lined with insulation rot and strands of old wiring. Every scrape of a boot against the wall sounded too loud. Every breath echoed. They didn't speak. Not here. Arthur led them through a series of turns. Left, then down a short drop into a disused coolant pipe, then through a section where the walls dripped with condensation from old leakages. This path had once been part of the municipal air filtration system for the city's mid-tier habitats. Now it was abandoned, half collapsed in places, used only by those desperate enough to move unseen. After nearly 20 minutes of crawling, Arthur stopped at a grated hatch. He twisted the manual lock until it clicked free, then pushed the hatch open with his shoulder. Dust and warm air rushed in. He climbed out, then turned and helped Lasari up. They emerged into a wide maintenance chamber beneath the city, an old industrial corridor lined with disconnected coolant lines, crates of brittle tubing, and overhead lighting that flickered but never stayed on. The smell of oxidized copper and burned plastic filled the air. Arthur turned and sealed the hatch behind them, jamming a pipe through the latch. They won't follow this deep unless they're tracking biosignatures, he said. They're tracking me, Lasari answered, brushing hair from her face. If they were smart, they scanned the deck and foam traces. Some of it would have clung to my skin. Arthur nodded grimly. Then we don't stay long. They moved quickly, stepping over debris, navigating broken platforms and ruptured floor grates. This wasn't the clean, artificial interior of the bunker. Down here, the city's belly was exposed, corroded, rotting, forgotten. Every intersection brought new hazards. Some passageways were blocked entirely. Others led into flooded shafts or drop tunnels. Arthur checked his map, a faded blueprint on a tablet screen with cracked glass. The destination was a collapsed mag train tube that intersected with an old hydroponic dome at the far end of the sector. He'd been there once. It was buried under rubble and overgrowth, but the roof was intact and the air was still breathable. They'd rest there, if they made it. As they crossed a broken catwalk, Lissari paused, then crouched. Wait! Arthur froze. She touched the floor with her fingers, her expression shifting. Pressure tripwire. He knelt beside her. Sure enough, beneath the rust was a narrow slit in the metal where a tension wire ran. Hard to see unless you knew where to look. Arthur stared at her. How did you spot that? She didn't look up. This is old Valari tech. Our clans used these for ceremonial defense routes. It's probably linked to an automated gas charge. Crude, but lethal. Can you disarm it? I can bypass it. She stepped over it with slow precision. Follow my exact path. Arthur did. When they made it to the far side, he watched as she disabled the trigger node with 2 careful motions of a broken blade she'd picked up earlier. She pressed something inside the casing until it gave a faint whine and shut down. Arthur exhaled, watching her. This wasn't luck. She knew systems, patterns, fail-safes. She wasn't just surviving, she was adapting. They moved on. After another 30 minutes, they reached the threshold of the mag train tunnel. It was a wide-open cavity, partially collapsed in the middle, but accessible from the side. An old transport sat derailed in the dark, its outer shell cracked open like a husk. Arthur climbed in first, flashlights sweeping through the interior. Empty. No scoff signs. No slaver marks. Lissari entered behind him and sat against the far wall, breath shaky. She pulled the shirt tighter around her body, then looked down at her bare feet. One heel was bleeding. Arthur kneeled beside her and dug into his satchel for a med strip. Let me see. She didn't resist. He pressed the sterile band around the wound, careful not to tighten it too much. Her skin twitched beneath his touch, but she didn't pull away. You've done this before, she said quietly. Used to treat workers back in the Habitat Towers, he replied, securing the wrap. Before everything collapsed. She looked at him. What did you lose? He hesitated. My wife. 2 years ago. She was in one of the vertical lift towers when the shielding failed. Got vaporized in a pressure leak. He paused. I haven't spoken that sentence in over a year. Lissari didn't say anything, but her hand shifted slightly, resting near his. You don't have to fix me, Arthur, she said after a while. I wasn't offering children because I thought I'd be good at it. I was offering what I thought someone would trade for. Arthur looked at her, really looked. Her face was different now. Less hollow. Still tired, still bruised, but alive in a way he hadn't seen when he first found her behind that crate. You're not a trade, he said. You're here because I couldn't walk away. A long silence stretched between them. Then from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a sound, metal shifting, slow and deliberate. Arthur was on his feet in seconds, flashlight up. Lissari stood too, tension across her shoulders. A tall silhouette stepped into view near the entrance of the tunnel. Human. Light armor. Pulse rifle across his chest. Not a scout. A bounty hunter. Arthur backed up slightly, pulling Lissari behind the train shell. The man stepped closer, stopping just 10 meters out. I don't want the human, the bounty hunter called, voice echoing in the chamber. Just the girl. I've got an ID tag. Your payout's guaranteed if you give her up. Arthur didn't respond. She's registered as abandoned cargo. That makes her fair claim under Sero's trade law. Don't get stupid over someone you just met. Arthur drew his sidearm. Not much power left in the cell, but enough to fry a man's chest plate if it hit clean. I don't do trades, he said. The hunter raised his weapon. Then you die for nothing. A moment of stillness. Then Lissari stepped forward, whispering just one word. Duck. Arthur dropped immediately. A high-pitched hum echoed through the tunnel. Lissari raised both hands and let out a low-frequency hum, the sound vibrating in her chest. An old emergency drone, long dormant near the ceiling, flickered to life. The drone's targeting system flashed red. It fired a burst of warning sparks directly at the bounty hunter. Not lethal, but blinding. Arthur surged up, fired his weapon once. The pulse hit the bounty hunter square in the chest. Armor cracked. He went down hard. Smoke filled the tunnel. Arthur turned to Lissari. She was shaking, lips pale, hands trembling. That hum, what was that? Emergency override code, she said through shallow breaths. Only those born to defense cast knew it. He stared at her. You're not just ceremonial, are you? He asked. I was raised for it, but I was also trained for war. Just in case. Arthur nodded once. Good, he said, because this won't be the last one. They left the tunnel fast, moving toward the greenhouse dome Arthur had scouted weeks ago. Neither spoke as they ran, but something between them had changed. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were surviving together. The greenhouse dome loomed like a fractured gem at the edge of the industrial quarter, buried beneath collapsed girders, faded moss, and the skeletal framework of a shattered filtration tower. From the outside, it looked abandoned, forgotten. But Arthur knew the access hatch still worked. He'd sealed it himself months ago, intending to use the place as a fallback shelter if his main bunker was ever compromised. Now it was the only safe space left. He pulled aside the synthetic tarp covering the hatch, punched in the override sequence, and the door clicked open with a hiss. A gust of stale, dusty air pushed up from below, warmer than the outside, filled with the scent of rotting vegetation and rust. Go, Arthur said, waving Lissarian ahead of him. She climbed down the narrow metal ladder without a word, boots barely making a sound against the rungs. He followed, sealing the hatch above them as the dim internal lights flickered on. Solar-fed, low power, just enough to see. The dome interior was vast, half the size of a city plaza. The hydroponic beds had long since dried out. The walls were lined with transparent alloy panels, most of them cracked but intact. Fungal growth clung to corners where nutrient gel had once leaked. Vines had dried into brittle strands, curling like dead fingers along the walls. But there was shelter here. Heat. Even a few sealed crates of old water packs and emergency rations, which Arthur had hidden beneath a collapsed irrigation duct. Lissari sat down near the edge of one of the dry grow beds. Her breathing was shallow, and the sleeve of his shirt was darkened from sweat. The long flight from the train tunnel had pushed her body hard. Arthur moved around the perimeter, scanning for breaches, checking motion sensors, reinforcing the hatch's inner seals. Only when he was sure the dome was secure did he finally sit down across from her. Here, he handed her a foil-wrapped ration bar and one of the water packs. She took them with a nod, biting slowly into the bar. Her hands trembled as she ate, but not from fear, just exhaustion. For the first time since he'd met her, Arthur didn't feel like he needed to speak. The silence between them wasn't tense now. It was shared, earned. They'd fought through something together. They both almost died. That meant something. After a while, she looked up at him. What you said back there, she began slowly, about not doing trades. Was it true? Arthur nodded. I didn't bring you with me for a transaction. Lissari studied him. Her silver eyes reflected the low light of the dome, glowing faintly. Then why? He leaned back against the cold frame of the grow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling overhead. Because I've watched this place turn people into animals. I've watched good people leave others to die because they thought it was the smart thing to do. I've done it. I've walked past people screaming for help. He paused. But you weren't screaming. You weren't begging. You looked at me like you still had something to protect. Lissari's jaw flexed slightly. I didn't want to lose the last thing I had. What was that? She hesitated, then answered. Myself. Arthur nodded once. For a while, they said nothing. The dome's low air recycler's words softly in the background. Then, very quietly, Lissari asked, Do you miss her? He turned his head slowly. My wife. She nodded. Arthur didn't answer right away. He thought about the pressure leak, the flash of light he hadn't seen, the moment the tower disappeared from the monitor screen. Every day, he said finally, but I don't dream about her anymore. That stopped months ago. I think the grief just changed shape. It's not loud anymore. It just follows me. Lissari lowered her eyes. I don't have anyone left to miss. You do now, Arthur said. Her head lifted. Their eyes met. The air between them shifted. She didn't smile. She didn't lean forward. She simply let her hand rest beside his on the metal ledge, close enough that their fingers brushed. Arthur didn't move away. Later, They laid out their bedrolls side by side in the warmer part of the dome, where old thermal lights still cast a weak glow. As Arthur unstrapped his boots and set down his weapon, Lissari moved beside him, wrapping herself in one of the thermal blankets. Her white hair spilled over her shoulder like silk. She turned toward him, voice quiet. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know," he replied. "I just don't want to be alone. Not tonight." He nodded. "You're not." She shifted closer, her body a warm presence beside his under the thin insulation. Her head rested near his shoulder. Their arms touched. She didn't speak again, and neither did he. But after a long silence, when the dome had gone quiet and the air felt still, she tilted her head slightly, just enough to look up at him. Her expression was calm, steady. Arthur met her gaze. She leaned in and kissed him, softly, without urgency. Just the barest contact. It wasn't about desperation. It wasn't about trade. It was a choice. And when Arthur returned the kiss, slowly, cautiously, it was a choice too. They slept in the same blanket that night. And for the first time in what felt like years, neither of them dreamed about the past. They just breathed. Together. Arthur woke to the soft sound of air cycling through the dome's filtration ducts. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. The silence, the stillness. No alarms, no weapons fire, no footfalls in the corridors above. Felt alien. Then he felt the warmth beside him. Lissari was still asleep, her body pressed gently against his under the blanket. One arm rested across his chest, and her breath came slow and even. Her face, turned slightly toward him, looked younger in rest, less guarded. Her hair fanned out over the thermal mat like a silver-white spill. For a long minute, Arthur didn't move. This was the first time since the collapse of Saros that he'd felt peace, real peace. Not the absence of threat, but the presence of something fragile and alive beside him. Not just survival, connection, but peace didn't last. The perimeter sensor blinked red on the far console. Arthur slipped from the blanket carefully, gently lowering Lissari's arm. He crossed the dome floor in silence and checked the screen. External seismic disturbance. Movement outside the greenhouse dome, too rhythmic for animals, too erratic for drones. Footsteps. Multiple. Heavy. His gut tightened. Lissari stirred as he turned back toward her, already pulling on his jacket and securing his satchel. She sat up quickly, sensing it. What is it? 4 figures. Outside, scanning the area. She was on her feet instantly, all trace of sleep gone. Militia? Could be. Or slavers who caught the false signal trail and doubled back. He checked the time. That trick from yesterday bought us hours, not days. She looked toward the dome's curved ceiling. This place doesn't have a backup exit. I know. Arthur activated the internal defenses, what few remained. Old heat scrambling nodes. Decoy heat sources. Static burst emitters. They wouldn't hold long. I can draw them away, Lissari said. Her voice was steady. Arthur froze. No, they're tracking me. My signature. I can lead them down to the water systems. You stay here. Wait them out. You'll be safe. I said no. It's the logical choice. Arthur turned sharply. You think I'm doing this out of logic? You think I brought you out of that alley, patched your wounds, ran through tunnels, fought off a hunter, just to watch you walk into a trap? Her expression didn't falter. You didn't bring me to die, but I won't let you die for me either. You're not an asset, he snapped. You're not a liability. You're a person. You don't get to decide alone. She stepped closer. Then what do we do, Arthur? We can't outrun them again. Not like before. We're too tired, too exposed. He looked past her at the wall-mounted crate, his last functioning power cell. And beside it, the emergency signal flare he had always kept in reserve. Then we make a stand, he said. She blinked. Here. He nodded. We reroute the thermal lines, overload the primary grid, draw them in, and then we blind them. We cut the lights, fire the flare, and hit them when they're disoriented. Lissari tilted her head. That might kill you. Arthur gave a faint, humorless smile. Better than watching you walk out that door. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then we do it together. They moved fast. Arthur rigged the old power conduits, to overload with a time capacitor surge. Lissari activated the old greenhouse misting units, setting them to release a fine chemical vapor that would refract the flare light and reduce visibility. She moved with precision, no hesitation, checking seals, aligning the flare burst with the overhead dome curve. When it was ready, they crouched behind a reinforced irrigation unit near the center of the dome, waiting. The sound of boots on metal grating echoed above. Then a hiss, cutting tools on the hatch. Arthur raised his weapon. Lissari held the flare. 3 seconds after they breach, he whispered. She nodded. The hatch slammed open. Figures dropped inside. 4 of them, masked, armored, silent. One raised a scanner. Then, the lights cut. The flare fired. Blinding white light filled the dome. The chemical mist scattered it across the chamber, turning shadows into smears, shapes into nothing. Arthur fired 3 shots. 2 missed. 1 dropped a figure. The others stumbled. 1 opened fire blindly, hitting a wall of piping. Steam exploded. Lissari moved like she'd trained for this. Low, fast, striking with the stunned baton Arthur had handed her earlier. She hit 1 in the knee, then the side of the helmet. The man went down. The last one lunged at Arthur, grabbed his arm. They grappled hard, twisting over the floor. Arthur's ribs screamed in protest, but he headbutted the attacker, then fired once point blank. Silence. Just the crackle of a broken coil, the hiss of steam escaping. Arthur leaned back against the wall, chest heaving. Lissari crouched beside him, her breathing just as rough. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. Nothing broken. They stood slowly, looked around. All 4 intruders were down, and the dome was still standing. Arthur reached out, resting a hand against her shoulder. "I would have done it again," he said quietly. "Taken you in." "I would have asked again," she replied. "Even if you said no the first time." He let his hand slide down her arm until their fingers linked. No one spoke as the mist cleared. They sat together again that night, in silence. Her head resting against his chest this time, his arm around her back. Neither slept much, but neither moved away. They didn't talk about what would come next, but neither of them would be leaving alone again. The dome was quiet again, but not like before. Now it was the silence that came after chaos, the kind where the walls still echoed with noise your ears couldn't forget. The bodies of the intruders lay in the corner, covered with thermal sheeting Arthur had dragged from the old supply locker. He would burn them later, far outside the dome, once the atmosphere vents cleared the chemical mist. For now, they were alive, and they had time. Arthur stood at the broken console, running diagnostics on the dome's solar batteries. One was intact, the other was shot, but the primary energy relay had survived the flare surge. It wouldn't run the full heating system, but it would keep the lights on. Maybe power the old irrigation pumps if he scavenged some wiring from the dead hunter's gear. Behind him, Lissari sat by the heater, wrapped in the now familiar thermal blanket, hair clean again and braided over one shoulder. Her violet skin, smooth but still marked with healing bruises, shimmered faintly in the sunlight streaming through the cracked dome ceiling. For the first time, her body wasn't tense. Her breathing was calm. She wasn't watching the walls, or the ceiling, or the hatch. She was watching him. Arthur turned. "This place will hold. For now. With the new wiring, I can reinforce the shield nodes and maybe even get the old vent filters working again." Lissari didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be studying him, his movements, his tone, his quiet certainty as he spoke. After a moment, she stood and crossed the dome floor barefoot, the blanket sliding off her shoulders. "Arthur." He stopped typing. She stepped in front of him. "You don't have to fix everything today." He looked at her, eyes shadowed by days without rest. "We have to be ready." "I know," she said, "but I want you to stop for a moment. Not because you're tired, not because it's safe, just because I need you here." Arthur hesitated. Then slowly, he stepped away from the console. The light above them flickered once, then steadied. Lissari's hand slid up to rest on his chest, fingers splayed. "You could have walked away. You should have, maybe." "I tried to," he said, "and I begged." He shook his head. "You didn't beg. You survived." She looked up at him, her voice softer now. "Back then, when I said I'd bear you children if you washed me. I didn't understand what I was asking for. I didn't even mean it the way I thought I did. I just wanted someone to see me as more than filth. I did. You do now, she corrected. But you didn't take what I offered. You gave more instead. Arthur met her gaze. What I want now isn't survival. It's you. If you'll stay. There was no pause. I will, she said. And then she kissed him again, not with hesitation, but with decision. Her hands gripping his shoulders, his arms circling her waist. They held each other like the only stable thing left in a broken world. Later, the two of them worked side by side to rebuild. Arthur rigged solar collectors from scavenged panels. Lissari stripped the bounty hunter's armor for parts and created perimeter alarms from their discarded gear. They cleared the dead, resealed the hatch, even patched the greenhouse wall enough to let filtered light in. Each night, they slept curled together on a mat under the dome's warmest corner. And each morning, they woke before the lights to work in silence, breaking it only with quiet conversation over food. On the sixth day, Lissari sat in the corner with his salvaged datapad, tapping through old Valari records Arthur had pulled from a downed relay drone. You know, she said, these ceremonial codes, they weren't just for bonding. Some of them were used to identify voluntary unions. No state sponsorship, no genetic council approval. Arthur looked over from where he was wiring the hydro pump. Like marriage. She smiled faintly. Not exactly, but close. You share a living space. You declare one another to any council you encounter. You take responsibility for the other. Publicly, Arthur stood up, wiped his hands on a cloth, and walked over. She held out the datapad. He looked down at the code. A symbol etched in ancient Valari script. He couldn't read it. What's it mean? It means she looked up at him. We chose. Freely. He took the pad, then knelt in front of her. I choose you, he said. I chose you, she replied. He reached out and touched her face. She leaned into it. They stayed that way for a long time. Nothing left to run from. Nothing left to prove. Just two people in the ruins of a dead city, building something new. And when Lissari whispered, now I can give you something, not because I must, but because I want to, Arthur didn't speak. He simply held her. And for once, there was no more fear. Only warmth. Only life. Only love.